He cried in court the day I was sentenced for the crime he committed. She took care of me. I never thought she'd do something so cruel, he whimpered. The judge looked at me like a monster. I watched as the man I'd cooked for, nursed through sickness, and defended against the world painted me as a villain. I spent 10 years behind bars, the image of his trembling, lying face haunting me. But fate, it wasn't done. I woke up one morning, decades younger. The clock had turned back. And this time, I wouldn't be the fool. In my first life, Leo played the perfect victim. Fragile, soft-spoken. A man life had bruised, but never broken. I met him at university. He limped with a cane, claimed a chronic illness, and wore pain like a second skin. I was drawn to him, fiercely protective, as if saving him might save something inside me. He told me his family abandoned him, that women only ever used him, that I was different, and I believed him. God, I believed him. I spent my youth cushioning his failures, excusing his outbursts, and cleaning up his quiet chaos. He never lifted a finger, not once. I worked 2 jobs, brought him his medications, handled bills, errands, everything. When I got sick, he called me dramatic. When I cried, he said I was unstable. And still, I stayed. I told myself love was sacrifice, that he was trying his best. But behind his helplessness was something colder, calculation, a pattern I ignored. Things went missing when friends visited. He always had excuses. Then, one day, I came home to find police waiting. Fraud, embezzlement. They traced everything back to my name. And Leo, he looked stunned, but strangely calm. Now, back in the past, I watched him from across the campus cafe, the same one where we first met. Same cane, same practiced sigh as he rubbed his knee, same sad story spilling from his lips to a new girl. My stomach turned. I knew every trick, every pause in his voice. But this time, I didn't offer help. I smiled, ordered my coffee, and sat just close enough to hear. He still had the same pattern: vulnerability, isolation, then control. But I had the advantage now. I wasn't the same girl, and I had a score to settle. I made him notice me, slowly, deliberately, bumped into him in the library, laughed at his dry jokes, wore softness like armor, just like before. His eyes lit up the same way they had years ago. "You're different," he murmured once. "You're not like other people." I smiled, playing the role he wanted. "I just like helping," I said, and he took the bait. But every kindness I gave came with a silent promise. This time, I would not break. I would learn every move, every lie, and every hidden truth. And when he finally trusted me, I'd burn it all down. I began documenting everything: his emails, his financial habits, his twisted manipulation of others. I noticed how he planted ideas in people's minds, only to deny he ever said anything. I saw the way he used pain to guilt others into action. He faked injuries to skip work, stole sympathy from those already suffering. One night, he forgot to take his meds. I watched quietly as he slipped the pills into the plant beside his bed. "You okay?" I asked. "Rough night," he whispered. I smiled, turned away, and took a photo. The first of many. He started isolating me, just like before. "Your friends don't really care," he said. "You're too good for them." I nodded. Let him think he was winning. He grew more confident, more reckless, borrowed money in my name, gaslit me when I questioned him. Each time, I played along while secretly building a case. I hid voice recorders, tracked every login on our shared laptop, created backups of every shady message. Revenge, I learned, was slow, but I didn't want it fast. I wanted it thorough, because justice isn't just about payback. It's about making sure they can never do it again. The girl he once lured in with limp sympathy now stood taller, stronger. I learned to cry on command, to look heartbroken when needed. It made him feel powerful, let him lower his guard. But inside I was steel. The moment I knew I had him, he bragged. Half drunk, eyes gleaming, he whispered, "People are so easy. Just show them a little pain, and they'll give you the world." I leaned in like it thrilled me. But my phone was recording. That line would become my favorite weapon. The final puzzle piece. The smoking gun. I printed everything. The bank records, stolen identities, videos of his lies. I filed a report with authorities, but anonymously. I didn't want headlines. I wanted impact. I mailed a full package to every person he'd ever manipulated, professors, ex-friends, even his estranged family. Then I booked a meeting with the dean of the university. "There's something you should see," I said, sliding the folder across his desk. Leo thought he'd built a web too intricate to untangle, but he forgot. I'd been trapped in it once before. I knew every knot. The fallout was deliciously silent. Whispers grew like fire in dry grass. Professors stopped speaking to him. Friends ghosted him. The girl he was wooing vanished. Then came the disciplinary board, the investigation, and, finally, expulsion. But the real climax was mine. I walked up to him, face to face, for the first time since our beginning. "You look disappointed," I said. He stared at me, betrayed. "Why?" he whispered. I leaned in, voice calm, "Because I remember everything." His eyes widened. Panic bloomed. I smiled, turned, and walked away, free. He tried calling me the next day. Emails, messages, all ignored. I didn't need an apology. I didn't want revenge that begged for forgiveness. I wanted power, and I had it now. I returned to my studies, focused on my own dreams this time. Art school, therapy, sleep, real sleep without fear. People saw the change in me. "You seem lighter," someone said. I didn't explain. How could I? They'd never know what it meant to survive your own death, emotionally, spiritually, and rise stronger. The old me died, loving him. The new me? She doesn't waste a second. 1 year later, I passed him on the street. No cane, no limp, just a man caught in a lie too long. Our eyes met. He opened his mouth to speak. I raised a hand, stopping him. "You don't get to rewrite the story," I said. "Not this time." His shoulders sagged as I turned away. I didn't need a crowd, didn't need applause. I had my justice, my rebirth, and the deep, still knowledge that I had faced down a manipulator, dismantled his lies, and reclaimed the years he stole. Not through rage, but through truth. The apartment felt different now, brighter, like the walls had exhaled. I lit a candle that night, not for him, but for me, a small ritual, a quiet celebration. I danced barefoot to an old playlist, the same songs that once reminded me of him. But now, they were mine again. I wasn't haunted by his memory anymore. I had reclaimed every piece of myself he'd tried to own. And for the first time in years, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I admired. Not for surviving, but for choosing to live fully, scars and all. My therapist once told me trauma doesn't just disappear. It transforms. It molds us, makes us cautious. Yes, but it can also make us wise. That wisdom became my armor. In class discussions, I spoke louder. At networking events, I no longer shrank myself. I saw how people respected my voice, something he had always tried to dim. I began volunteering at a local shelter for women, listening to others, helping them piece their lives together. I felt stronger, like my pain had a purpose beyond revenge, like maybe I could be a light in someone else's darkness. One afternoon, while helping organize a fundraiser, I met a man named Elias. Soft-spoken, kind-eyed, and wildly different from Leo. He didn't dominate conversations or speak in riddles. He listened, truly listened. I caught myself smiling more around him, though part of me hesitated. Was it too soon to trust again? But Elias never rushed me, never pushed. He offered friendship, safety, and space. One evening, as we closed up the event hall, he looked at me and said, "You carry something powerful, like you've been through fire," and walked out holding it. I didn't respond. I just smiled and believed him. I never told Elias about Leo, at least not right away. That story, that wound, wasn't something I handed out freely anymore. But eventually I let it out in pieces, small confessions over quiet dinners. Elias never pitied me. He didn't offer solutions. He simply held my truth like it was something sacred. That alone was healing. And slowly, without realizing it, I stopped bracing for betrayal, stopped scanning conversations for red flags. Not because I forgot what happened, but because I trusted myself now to walk away if it did again. That was real growth. That was my rebirth. News of Leo's downfall spread beyond the university. He moved cities, tried rebranding himself online as a mental health advocate. Ironically, but lies have a way of catching up. The videos I leaked resurfaced. A woman from his past reached out to me, thanking me for validating her experience. "I thought I was the only one," she wrote. I cried reading that, not out of sadness, but out of release. My story had given someone else the courage to face theirs. That kind of ripple, no courtroom could replicate it. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was redemption. I visited my mother for the first time in months. She opened the door, startled. "You look different," she said. "Better." I hugged her tightly. We sat in the kitchen, sipped tea, and I told her everything. Not just about Leo, but about me. About how I'd let myself disappear in someone else's narrative for too long. About how I clawed my way back. She held my hand across the table. "You've always been strong," she said. "You just forgot." I didn't correct her. Maybe I had forgotten. But now, that strength was no longer buried. It was blazing. The nightmares didn't stop immediately. Some nights, I'd still wake up gasping, heart racing, convinced I was back in that twisted chapter. But then I'd touch the edge of my desk, hear the hum of my humidifier, and remember, I was safe. I'd breathe, count 5 things in the room, remind myself I was free. Healing, I learned, wasn't linear. It was messy, but it was mine. And that mattered more than perfection. I started writing about it, journals at first, then blog posts. People responded. "You said exactly what I felt for years," one comment read. I smiled. Words had power. It had taken years, betrayal, and pain to get here. But now, when I walked down the street, I no longer flinched at every shadow. I no longer rehearsed apologies in my head. I didn't need to shrink myself to make others feel bigger. I took up space. I existed boldly. And every step I took felt like a quiet declaration. I survived you. But more importantly, I found myself. That was the real revenge. Not destroying him, but rebuilding me. Stronger, louder, unapologetically whole. One evening, I opened an old box of photos. Among them was one of Leo and me, taken years ago. We were at a park, fake smiles plastered on our faces. I studied mine. The girl in the picture didn't know she'd spend years untangling that smile from survival. I didn't cry. I didn't burn the photo either. I placed it back in the box and shut it. Not everything from the past needed to be destroyed. Some of it just needed to be left behind, as proof of how far you've come. When I published my first essay on surviving emotional abuse, it went viral. Thousands of messages poured in. Women, men, non-binary folks, all saying the same thing. Thank you. I hadn't realized how many people carried stories like mine in silence. One message stood out. I thought I was alone. You made me feel seen. That line echoed in me for days. It was the full circle moment I didn't know I needed. I wasn't just reborn. I was reaching back, helping others find their own new beginnings. That's what healing became. A chain reaction of courage. Months passed, and my days were full again, not with damage control or emotional labor, but with creation. I painted again, something I hadn't done in years. At first, it was just color splashed in frustration. But then, images started to form, women walking through fire, shedding chains, growing wings. My professor saw one and asked to feature it in an upcoming student exhibit. There's something raw and freeing in this, she said. I smiled, humbled but proud. My pain had turned into art. My story was now a canvas others could see themselves in. And that was everything. Elias came to the exhibit. He stood silently in front of one of my pieces, a shadowy figure in the background, with a bright, unbroken woman walking away from him. Is that you? He asked softly. That was me, I said. Now I'm somewhere beyond the frame. He smiled and squeezed my hand. In that moment, I realized something. Love doesn't heal you. You heal you. But real love holds space for that healing. Doesn't rush it. Doesn't shape it. Just holds it. And for the first time, I believed I was worthy of that kind of love. I was invited to speak at a panel on emotional manipulation and recovery. My heart raced as I stepped on stage. Public speaking used to terrify me, but now it felt necessary. I told my story, not the polished, heroic version, but the messy truth, the doubt, the shame, the nights I almost went back. The people nodded. Some cried. Afterward, a woman hugged me and whispered, "You just told my story." That moment stayed with me. It reminded me that survival isn't a finish line, it's a shared path. And when we speak, we light it for others. One day, I received a package. No name. Inside, a handwritten note. I'm sorry. For everything. It was signed with initials. LT. My hands trembled. For a brief second, my heart skipped in that old, familiar fear. But then, I laughed. Not cruelly, just free. I tossed the letter into the trash without reading the rest. I didn't need closure from him. I had given it to myself a long time ago. Let him wrestle with guilt. Let him reach for forgiveness. I was too far ahead now. That chapter wasn't even in my book anymore. I changed my number, moved to a new place, a loft above a quiet bookstore, filled with sun and air and peace. My space was mine, no second toothbrush, no secret passwords, no whispered doubts. Just me. And yet, I didn't feel alone. I felt whole. Some nights, I'd light a candle and write, not to vent, but to remember, not to dwell, but to celebrate. I captured the woman I had become, the boundaries I'd built, the life I now protected like treasure. And I realized something. The most powerful kind of revenge is building a life they can't enter. Sometimes people ask, if you could go back, would you erase him? My answer surprises them. No, I wouldn't, because without him, I might have stayed soft in the wrong ways. I might have never learned to say no with conviction, to love myself without conditions. He broke me, but only temporarily. What I built afterward was stronger, more resilient, more real. I am not grateful for the pain, but I'm grateful for what it unearthed. Because hidden beneath my need to be loved was a fierce woman who finally chose herself. One rainy evening, I sat by the window and reread an old journal entry. I had written, "I don't know who I am without him." I traced the words with my finger and gently crossed them out. Beneath it, I wrote, "I know exactly who I am, and I never needed him to define it." It felt like reclaiming sacred ground. I tucked the journal away and poured a glass of wine. My past no longer had claws in me. It was just a story now. One I survived. One I owned. I began mentoring younger students. Girls who reminded me of myself, eager to please, afraid to upset anyone, apologizing for their own brilliance. I looked them in the eye and said, "You don't owe anyone your softness." Some cried. Some nodded in silence. But all of them listened. That's how I knew I had changed. I didn't just survive for myself. I survived so others would know they could too. That legacy felt bigger than revenge, bigger than justice. It felt like purpose, like finally becoming the woman I had always needed when I was younger. Elias and I took a trip to the coast. Just a weekend. Long walks, books by the sea, and quiet joy. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. He saw all of me and still stayed, and that was enough. On our last night, he looked out at the ocean and said, "You're not what happened to you." I nodded. "I'm what I did with what happened to me." We held hands under the stars. No promises. No fantasies. Just presence. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing, to simply be, after years of just surviving. I kept writing. My blog turned into a book deal. Rebirth Isn't Clean was the title I chose, because it wasn't. It was messy, ugly, beautiful, worth it. The book hit shelves a year later, and in signing lines, people shared their stories with trembling voices. I saw in them what I once felt in myself: shame, confusion, fear, hope. And I told every one of them, "You're not broken. You're building something stronger." That was the truth I carried everywhere now. That strength isn't loud. It's not always fire. Sometimes it's just the decision to keep going. I didn't attend Leo's disciplinary hearing. I was invited, even encouraged. But I'd already faced him once, and that was enough. I chose peace instead. That day, I went hiking alone, deep into the woods where no signal could reach me. I stood on a ridge and screamed, not in pain, but in triumph. The wind carried it far, and I imagined it crashing into every memory where I had once felt small. That moment wasn't about him at all. It was about me choosing my own narrative, one where I didn't need to watch him fall to know I'd risen. People often think revenge is fire, explosive, and visible, but mine was quieter. It was in the way I no longer flinched at loud footsteps, in how I deleted his number without hesitation, in the calm that filled my chest when his name came up and didn't ignite rage, just indifference. I didn't need to see him suffer to know I'd won. My victory was the life he could never access, the love he could never understand, the woman he would never know again. That was the sweetest kind of justice, unreachable joy. The university eventually made a public statement, vague, polished, but firm. He was no longer allowed to teach. Several students stepped forward after me. Their stories were eerily similar: emotional grooming, manipulation, twisted praise. We didn't speak much, but when we crossed paths, there was a silent nod, a warrior's nod. We'd each walked through fire alone, but together we lit a bonfire of truth. He wasn't untouchable anymore. The silence had shattered, and from that crack, something fierce had grown: solidarity. I changed my major, not out of fear, but because I'd found a calling I hadn't seen before. I started studying trauma psychology, determined to understand not just what happened to me, but why it kept happening to so many others. My professors supported me. My classmates admired me, I became that student who asked the hard questions, who challenged the neutral case studies with real-life messiness. I brought humanity into academia, and it felt like reclaiming something. I wasn't just a survivor. I was becoming a force for change. Elias gave me a camera on my birthday. "You see the world differently," he said. "Capture it." At first, I was hesitant. I hadn't touched a lens in years. But one foggy morning, I stepped outside and began snapping photos, light cutting through mist, old buildings with ivy scars, people holding hands in silence. The world felt full again. Every frame told a story. Every shadow had depth. I realized I had spent years seeing only what I feared. Now, I was seeing everything. That shift wasn't small, it was monumental. One day, while reorganizing my bookshelf, a letter fell out. My old application to Leo's mentorship program. My handwriting looked so eager, so trusting. I sat down and read it. Every line was full of hope, hope he had used against me. I could have cried, but instead, I folded it back gently and placed it in a keepsake box. Not as a wound, but as a marker, a reminder of how far I'd come. That letter didn't represent failure. It represented beginning. And beginnings, no matter how painful, are still sacred. I hosted a small gathering for the survivors who had come forward. We met in a quiet cafe after hours, lit only by string lights and soft music. No structured agenda. Just food, laughter, shared glances. Some brought poems. Others shared updates, new jobs, fresh starts, therapy wins. We didn't talk much about Leo. He wasn't important anymore. We were. That space we created, gentle, powerful, unshaken, was proof that we had rebuilt. Not just as individuals, but as a collective. Stronger, wiser, unbreakable. My relationship with my body changed too. For so long, I'd seen it through his gaze, something to be controlled, pleasing, silent. Now, I moved for myself. I danced without mirrors. I stretched in the sun. I wore what I wanted, not what I thought made me look palatable. I stopped apologizing for existing in a space. And when people complimented me now, it wasn't about beauty. It was about energy. "You glow," they'd say. And I'd think, yes, that's what freedom looks like. My father called one evening. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the fallout with Leo. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said to try. He apologized, fumbling, raw. "I should have protected you better," he said. I didn't offer instant forgiveness, but I listened. We talked for hours. Not just about the pain, but about life. Books, movies, old memories. He was trying, and so was I. Healing wasn't just personal, it was generational. And maybe, just maybe, by opening that door again, we were breaking the cycle. I stood in front of a mirror one night, candlelight flickering behind me. I looked at myself, not with critique, but reverence. I traced my collarbone, the curve of my shoulder, the rise and fall of breath. "You made it," I whispered. It wasn't about looking beautiful. It was about recognizing presence. I was still here, still soft, still fierce. The scars no longer whispered shame. They sang survival. And with a deep breath, I whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone else, just to me, for staying, for rising, for never giving up. Spring arrived early that year. Everything bloomed faster, like the universe was rushing to start anew. I walked past the building where I once met Leo, where it all began. I paused, not out of fear, but reflection. There was no hate in me now, just clarity. He was still there, in the timeline of my life, but only as a chapter. One I had read, closed, and moved on from. The air smelled like jasmine, and I smiled. It wasn't the place that held power. It was the woman who walked past it, free. A publishing house picked up my manuscript. They said it felt raw, modern, and deeply human. I was stunned. I had written it for me, for healing. And yet, others saw value in it. The story wasn't about Leo, not really. It was about all the women who gave too much, stayed too long, doubted their own brilliance. It was about the quiet revolution of reclaiming yourself. My words weren't weapons, they were balm. And I was finally at peace with using my voice. Not for revenge, not for proof, but for truth. During a radio interview, the host asked me, "What would you say to the girl you used to be?" I hesitated. Tears welled up, uninvited. Then I answered. I'd tell her she was never broken, just buried under someone else's shame. And one day, she'd dig herself out and shine so fiercely that no one could ever dim her again. Silence filled the studio after that. It wasn't rehearsed. It was real. And maybe that's what people needed most. Not perfection, but raw honesty. We all crave that moment of awakening. I received an email from a girl in Brazil who had read my story. She wrote, "You saved me. I didn't even know I needed saving until I read your words." I cried, not out of sadness, but awe. The ripple effect was real. My pain had turned into someone else's turning point. I had become what I wished I had all those years ago, a voice in the dark saying, "You're not alone." That meant more than any applause. That was the purpose I never saw coming. At a conference, I sat beside therapists, authors, and advocates, all of them powerful, all of them human. We spoke about recovery, not just as a process, but as a right. One speaker said, "Revenge is not rage, it's reclamation." That hit me deep, because I didn't burn bridges, I built new ones. I didn't destroy him, I outgrew him. My victory wasn't loud, it was lasting. And in that room, surrounded by survivors turned leaders, I felt it belonging. Elias proposed on a quiet morning with coffee and socks mismatched. "No ring," he said, "just us. If you want." I didn't say yes immediately. I asked for time, not out of doubt, but respect. I had learned to choose, slowly, consciously. Weeks later, I wrote him a letter. "Yes," it said, "not because I need you, but because I want to walk beside someone who sees me." That's what love looked like now. Not saving, not fixing, just walking. Together, on our wedding day. I wore white, not as a symbol of purity, but of peace. The ceremony was small. Friends, family, survivors who had become sisters. My father walked me down the aisle, tears in his eyes. "You've always been brave," he whispered. I smiled. I believed it now. When Elias took my hands, I didn't feel fear. I felt certainty. We weren't erasing the past. We were honoring the journey. This wasn't a new beginning. It was a continuation of becoming. Later that night, I stepped outside barefoot, looking at the stars. The world was quiet. My world was full. I thought about every version of myself, naive, broken, healing, rising. I whispered a soft goodbye to the girl who once begged to be chosen. She didn't need that anymore. She had chosen herself. And in doing so, she had changed everything. I felt her inside me still, not as a ghost, but as a foundation. She had endured, and I had built a life on her strength. A year later, I opened a community center, a place for women to gather, heal, learn, and grow. We named it the Second Flame, because the first light may go out, but the second, it's chosen, nurtured, fierce. The center offered therapy, art classes, legal support, and storytelling nights. And every wall bore the names of women who had risen from ashes. I didn't just build a safe place. I built a revolution. quiet, glowing, and unstoppable. One evening, as I was locking up, I noticed a young girl standing at the gate. She looked unsure, scared. "Is this for people like me?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes, especially for people like you." I opened the door. She stepped in. And in that moment, I realized something. My story didn't end with revenge. It didn't end with healing. It kept going. In every person I reached, in every life I helped shape. That's what rebirth really is. Not a one-time moment, but a living, breathing legacy